girl, Abby, aka New Age Coach here, and I am lighting the way for those on their way to the light. And in today's video, I would like to talk about my first float tank experience. If you're not sure what a float tank is and you're curious to find out, you definitely want to continue on through the rest of this video. A float tank is a pool, an enclosure, a container, whatever you want to label it. It holds about 10 to 12 inches of water, and it is akin to your body temperature, and it is semi-saturated with over 800 pounds of Epsom salt. Yes, you just heard that correctly, 800 pounds. So that Epsom salt is what increases the density of the water, which is what allows you to be able to float effortlessly. And your body's just completely relaxed in it. And it's the buoyancy of the water because of that salt that is doing all that work for you. So it keeps your kind of neckline, like from here, your nose and mouth and above here, above that water at all given times. So the tank is completely dark and soundproof. And all you can hear is you. And all you can see, eyes open or closed, is, well, nothing, because it's complete darkness. So I know that it sounds off-putting to a lot of people, or can sound terrifying to some people. And, you know, for me, when I heard it, it just spoke to my soul. It's something I knew that I had to do. And from a science and a research perspective, there's just overwhelming consensus that benefits to float tanks include not only just benefits for the body, like making your skin more supple and nice due to the salt from the water, but it has overwhelming benefits in terms of, you know, things that are inclusive but not limited to, you know, stress, pain, and injury relief, relieving anxiety and insomnia, improving performance and creativity, and my new personal favorite, elevating spiritual practice. I think it's safe to assume that we all agree that we live in an overstimulated, overstressed, non-stop world. And at the time that float tanks made their way into kind of my awareness, into my energetic field, my reality, you know, I was at the very beginning of my spiritual journey, and my brain was just feeling quite frazzled and short-circuited, and just, I was in desperate need of rest, and I felt like I was all over the map mentally, and just having a hard time processing my thoughts, turning them into words, getting them out of me. I didn't really understand what was happening, and just I was trying to make sense of life overall as part of the awakening, but just everything just felt like a whirlwind in my life. And between a hectic work schedule and the stress of that, coupled with the confusion, the anxiety, and the isolation that can accompany a spiritual awakening, again, I was just burnt out and I was overwhelmed. So if you had a chance to watch my first video on YouTube, firstly, thank you. And secondly, I'll link it below. But if you had a chance to listen to that, you'll know that kind of at the time of my actual spiritual awakening, I became obsessed with just information and searching for answers, and YouTube was a huge part of that. And I was addicted to it. And this one particular YouTuber I came across just, again, by way of actually learning about ayahuasca, as I was being called to that, which I talk about in a separate video. She actually worked at a float center, and a good chunk of her videos were about the experiences that she would have in her center's tanks. And those were very insightful and spiritual and eye-opening experiences that would teach her things about herself, about the world around her. You know, she talked about experiences with mudras and her hands going into certain positions, you know, not by way of her consciously doing that, by her body telling her that through these experiences. Just really fascinating stuff. And I was addicted to watching every single one of her float tank experiences. And I was sold from that point on that, yeah, I'm definitely going to do this. And while I would like to call that manifestation or law of attraction, or I created my reality to make that happen, again, I have to give credit where it's due. And I have an amazing, supportive, just, I heart him, boyfriend who, for my birthday, gave me a gift to actually go to my first float tank experience. So babe, thank you. Overall, my first float tank experience was absolutely enjoyable. It was amazing. And the biggest tip that I'd have for anyone going into this experience themselves is really just stay open and do not have, or try not to have, any expectations. And I'll tell you why now. During this time in my spiritual journey, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, and I was going through this awakening process, and I was meditating a lot, and I had at that point like more than a dozen of just weird things that happened to me, inexplainable things. And you know, I've alluded to a lot of these things in past videos. I've actually talked about specific things in some of my past videos. Some I haven't, or at least not yet. And one example of that that I haven't spoke about on YouTube is, you know, I went to my dentist office literally a couple weeks after my initial awakening, and I looked at my dentist who had the earth rotating in the middle of her forehead. Clear as day, just the earth in her forehead. So, you know, I bring that up because I had been overdosing on videos of people's out of this world float tank experiences, and coupled with the experiences I was having myself as part of my spiritual awakening outside the float tank, just in general, like the earth in my dentist's forehead, I brought that into the tank with me, or that's what I believe I did. And there was this little tiny part of me, in retrospect, that I think expected or hoped for some amazing vision or astral travel or just something so grandioso to happen. And admittedly, that left me with just this little tinge of disappointment at the end of it when I was finished. And that's why I talk about really trying not to have any expectation when you go in. This isn't to minimize the experiences I did have in the tank, which were absolutely incredible in their own right, and I'll talk about that next. It really is, again, about just kind of expectation setting. And you know what? My little tinge of disappointment after, you know, it showed me an overall theme for me, to my personality as it relates to, you know, having expectations and just being grateful no matter what experience that we get from life. And it also reiterated for me that I just need to trust the process. Things will be revealed how and when they divinely should, and that healing happens no matter what. That's the important part. Even if you think nothing's happening, whether you're meditating, whether you're in a float tank, whether you're just waking up and going about your normal day, in and out of the tank, you are being healed. You are progressing on your spiritual path. You are learning just by being aware and just by being in the moment. So remember that. I made it this far in the video, so it's only right we actually get to my personal experience for my first time float, since that's what this video is titled. Guys, I have made it. I am in my float room shower. Here it is. This little guy is gonna give me an amazing experience. That is what I'm going into, in pitch darkness. So we shall see how this goes. To be continued. I'm just getting out. I'm foggy. I'll talk soon. Wow. So it took me about a good 20 minutes to actually get settled and comfortable in the tank. And I was scheduled for a full hour, and people arrange sessions from anywhere from an hour to 4 hours and beyond. So there's a lot of kind of flexibility and kind of time allocation you'll need to do this. And I'll talk about that in my tips below. But basically, you know, just to get settled in, embrace the actual floating, get the feel for it, trying not to control it or myself and drown out my thoughts. And yes, that pun was intended. And just to accept the darkness, you know, again, with or without my eyes being closed. And then from that point, from the point of acceptance and just, okay, you know, that's kind of where it did get interesting. So the first thing I heard, and yes, I said heard, even though I was in complete and utter silence, was this tribal drum. And it was super, super faint and in the distance. And it sounded like it was building up and progressively getting closer to me. But it was so bizarre because I didn't think it was from within me that I was hearing that, within me or my mind or my conscious. I had no idea. I was convinced that this was happening outside of my room from the receptionist area or an event they must have been doing, because you do get your own personal little room. So I was just convinced something was going on outside and I could hear it through the tank. So it actually prompted me to open up my tank to just kind of look around and reassess my senses to say, is that in me, or is that, am I actually experiencing that through this experience, or is that from the outside? And of course that distracted me, and it wasn't coming from outside. There was no drum sound. It had gone away. It wasn't in the reception area, in the float center, or in my head anymore. So I closed the tank and I went back, and by the time I got flowing back into that relaxed state, again, that slow, faint kind of drumming, tribal sounding, like again, faint, 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 coming closer and closer and closer. And it gave me the sense, the feeling that like I was trying to be communicated with, and that someone, or more like a group of people, a tribe, like this, the word tribe keeps popping up for me, like this ancestral feeling of connection, that they were making their way to me. But I kept getting so caught up in trying to see, is this real? Is this not real? And questioning what was happening and being in my thoughts instead of this letting it organically unfold, that every single time I had the question or the thought and just kind of lost my flow there, the drums were gone. The second thing that I experienced was that I somehow felt like overall, like my essence was just my heartbeat. No body, no mind, just my heart. And no visuals throughout this experience as I'm talking through these things. A lot of this is just the stream of consciousness or whatever it's called, but I didn't get any visuals. This is more of feelings and knowing and intuition and just awareness. So with that said, again, it was just kind of this download of knowing. It was this intense awareness of hearing what my own heartbeat sounded like, how it just worked perfectly and fiercely and effortlessly, and how it was the pulse and the breath to everything that connects us. And it was showing me, this is who I am. My heart is who I am. And this is the first time I've truly ever heard my own heartbeat in that way that I received that message. And I'm not sure how to succinctly describe the feeling that it gave me, but again, it was like showing me a new perspective. And it's like the way a mother or a father, the way they see and hear their baby's heartbeat for the first time during pregnancy, that anticipation of life, of birth, of creation, it's just, it was quite beautiful in that sense. And as I've had time to reflect kind of on that message and how I felt and feeling every just pulse and beat of my essence and the essence of the world, it's just, again, a good symbolic kind of lesson from a spiritual awakening perspective. And, as humans, I've said this before, but we're all so programmed to think with our brain, with our egos, and our souls want us to follow our hearts. And that's our navigation system in this life, on this earth. And that's where our intuition is. Our hearts connect us to everything greater on this planet. And I was ignoring my heart before my awakening. This was just a subtle reminder that, through this process, I just have a new kind of guidance system and way to perceive everything. The third thing that I experienced was this intense focus or awareness drawn to my breath. And I'm not sure I can do this justice either in terms of trying to explain it, but I'll try. And in short, it was the breaths that I was taking, so inhaling and exhaling, that became the wind in my mind. And the way you might hear the wind whistling outside, kind of that breezy day, that cool, calm flow of just like playful twirling air or wind, that was coming out of me. I was the wind, and the wind was me. And also from the same time, I was kind of in this position where I was the observer. I was observing me being the wind. I was observing me hearing my breath come out of me as physical wind. And I can't explain it, but so my breath in would be like, and I would be like, but obviously that took effort for me to do that right now. And this was actually just like an automated, inherent, natural thing, the way it unfolded in kind of the state that I was in. And having time to process, again, my float tank experience. So it's been about a month or change since I went, which I don't think I've mentioned. But now that I've had time to kind of process this, I think that's, again, super symbolic. The reason I went into the float tank outside of elevating my spiritual practice, was to calm down, to de-stress, to recenter. And breath is our life force. It's everything. You know, how many times do we hear if you're angry or you're sad or you're frustrated or overwhelmed or anxious? The answer is just breathe. The breath that lives within us, it connects us to everything outside of us as well. We're all everything: wind, water, fire, earth. So when I went home later that night too, I think this is even more interesting than just that experience of the physical kind of wind-like experience, if that makes sense, was that before I was going to bed, outside of my window, I could actually hear the wind blowing. And the noise the wind was making was the exact same noise of the wind that came out of me. That same breath, that same sound, that same just knowing and tingles. That's you, that's me kind of again messaging. So it was just really beautiful coming full circle after the experience. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've been interested in trying a float tank or thinking about it or on the fence about it, I really do hope that my experience, this video, really kind of guides your decision and prompts you to do it. If you've made it to the end of this video, you know, you should pay attention to that as well. I 100%, no question about it, will be doing this again. And I can testify that even just from one visit, my first time float, that the benefits physically, mentally, spiritually already are plentiful. So do not fret, do not fear, just be open. So please, if you have any questions, just leave a comment below and I will be sure to get back to you. Also, if you have your own float experience, I'd love to hear from you as well. So please make sure to drop a note. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're interested in learning about 5 tips in order to be prepared for your own float experience, definitely continue on through the next couple minutes of this video. And for the sake of puns, because I love them, I will of course keep you afloat of my next spiritual adventure. And from here, I hope your day goes swimmingly. Thank you. 5 tips on how to prepare for your first float. Real quickly, number 1, avoid caffeine and alcohol and drugs. Alcohol and drugs, they are controlled substances and they already mess with your senses overall. So the point of the tank is really to have a sensory or senseless experience. So it really is just counterintuitive for you to do that and you wouldn't really get the true benefits of the tank. Plus, I'm for DARE, Abby against drugs, or you get what I'm saying. Don't do drugs overall. Also, we all know that caffeine is a stimulant, so just be cautious of your intake before going into it and try to avoid it if possible, just because it'll make it harder for your brain to calm down before your session. Tip number 2, don't shave or wax or have open wounds, which sounds really gross, because it is. So the salt will definitely irritate the freshly shaved or waxed legs or whatever body part. So just try to leave your body au natural for going into your session. And Band-Aids, if you have any on or plan to wear them in, they probably will come off in the water. So try to use liquid bandages ahead of time if you have anything to cover up. And most places do provide some sort of liquid Band-Aid or, you know, that stuff as needed. But definitely use your just best judgment and common sense and courtesy overall. If you have an open wound, do not float. If you have a rash, do not float. Tip number 3, remind yourself why you're floating in advance and make yourself as comfortable as possible for your float. So it can be very easy to spiral into these thoughts of what if this, what if that, and what if a scary thought pops into my head. So it's really important to remind yourself why you're floating, why you're doing this, really putting your intentions out ahead of time and being cognizant of that. And that's gonna help ease any worry or fear or doubt that pops in. And especially while you're in your float, if any of those unwanted thoughts or fears do come in, it'll make it that much more easier if you've practiced this in advance to have tell those thoughts to consciously leave just as easily as they came in. Secondly, there's no right or wrong way to float. So while some things are preferred, like having the tank door closed at all times to get that full experience, you can put the door in any position. You can leave the tank open. Whatever's gonna make you feel comfortable to float, do you, girl or guy, or however you identify, do you. Same way, while it's preferred to float naked to get that true experience, if you feel more comfortable in a bathing suit, again, have at it. Tip number 4, be prepared to shower before and after your float. Showering before getting into the tank will obviously help relax the body, which enhances the overall floating experience, but for obvious reasons as well, showering beforehand is just that added precaution to keep floaters and the tanks safe from germs and bacteria and as clean as possible. So you'll also want to shower after the float just to clear off all of the salt solution that you'll be covered in as well. Tip number 5. Budget your time before and after your float. So people, like I said in this video, float anywhere from an hour up to 4 and beyond. It's all about preference and your budget, of course. But I'd recommend that when preparing for your float, that you should pad in some extra time at the end of your session or for a good chunk of your day if you have that luxury, just to kind of recoup. For some people, like I said, even for me, that calm, relaxed, kind of trancy state induced by my float, that lasted way longer than my session, through that day, through that night, like all the way through till when I went to bed. So I just want to caution you to be mindful, to take care of yourself, to listen to your body, and really just to take as much time that you can kind of reflect on your experience afterwards too. So it's not just about the time spent in the tank.